All right, friends. Well, what I wanted to do, so I think it was last week, Heidi had mentioned that there was a talk about afflictive emotions that was shared, and there was some discussion about afflictive emotions, and I guess maybe a little bit of questions that came up around it. So I thought what I would do is do a little talk on it tonight and have time for discussion. I think one of the things that happens when we listen to talks, we don't know the context of the talks we're listening to usually. Where was the teacher at the time the talk was given? I know when I first, this is back in the days of cassettes, when I first started listening to any kinds of talks like this, I would get Joseph Goldstein, a teacher at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. I would get I loved his teachings, and I would get one of his, and he would start out, "We're on day 29 of our 60-day retreat." And I'm sure he sounded normal to people who were on day 29 of their 60-day retreat. But for me, coming in and just hearing that tape, it was it was like almost too calm for me. But he was not speaking to me getting in my car listening to a Dharma talk on my way to work. He was talking to people who had been quiet for all that time. So I just mention that because when we hear teachers talk, especially a recording, it's important that we pay some attention to the context of where they were at the time they were talking, and maybe even who they were talking to. I'll tell you a little trick of Dharma talks. There are times when you're doing a Dharma talk as a teacher, and you're really talking to one person in the group. You're talking for one person in the group, to the group, but you're really sharing for one person in the group for something that might have come up. So it's just important to take that into account, because when we hear a Dharma talk or read anything, we have to mix it in with our practice. It becomes something to add to our practice. I always say, let Dharma talks and books be the spices, and let your practice be the rice. We have a tendency to do it the other way around, right? I'll sit for 10 minutes and then I'll listen to an hour of talks. So that's backwards. That's too much spice. Talks are always just fingers pointing to something. What are they pointing to? This, to look here. So that's just a context help especially when we talk about things like afflictive emotions or other things that are, I'll call them the fringe of our hardcore meditation practices. So what I wanted to do was maybe give a little context for afflictive emotion discussions in the context of Dharma. When I say they're on the fringe, dealing with afflictive emotions is a huge area. And on one end, it's actually a psychological issue that we're dealing with. So and that's the way we know that is by the content. How strong is the content of what it is that we're dealing with? In other words, are there stories in our mind or emotions that are giving rise to these stories that keep coming back to us? It's often things that have to do with our family of origins, where we were when we were little, and we formed our tools and ways of dealing with things, and those keep coming back to us throughout our lifetime. Maybe you were a younger child in a larger family, and weren't heard. Maybe there was some kind of verbal abuse or even physical abuse. There's patterns and scars that get worn into us when we have these types of things in our youth. And I think what happens for us is we sit and try to meditate, and that's kind of the landscape that these ruts have been familiar with operating in. So afflictive emotions, sometimes when we sit in meditation, they'll begin to arise for us. So if we find that we keep returning to the same issue, the same content, the same stories, what happened in my youth, what happened to me when I was young, people wouldn't listen to me, I was abused, this, that, whatever it is, whatever that story is, if the story keeps coming back, or begins to become the foundation of how we're feeling, it might be time to look into counseling. What we really want to do is address the content, the stories, because they're psychological. We address those with psychological work, which is counseling. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. It's just the appropriate tool to meet the stories. Meditation really doesn't deal with the stories. We use the stories to express ourselves, but this is not the foundation for working our way through our stories. And when I say that, sometimes we do actually work our way through our stories with meditation, but we're coming at it through the processes of the mind. We're working with the processes of the mind. So for example, when I think of afflictive emotions, there's two big categories the way I think of them. One is outward-facing afflictive emotions. So that's things like anger, frustration, things of that sort. They feel like they're pushing out. It's my reaction and my relationship to the world out there. Those tend to be pretty safe for us. I can get angry and often feel energized by my anger. I've had people tell me, well, if I don't get angry, I don't act. I mean, they really feel like it's that anger that causes them to act in the world. But usually when we're angry, it can actually be the greed of it. The Buddha called anger, he said it had a poison root and a honey crest. So that surface of it tastes sweet to us. We feel empowered and strong, but it's got a poison root in our soul. So coming from a place of anger like that outward focus can be kind of safe and protective for us. The other kind of afflictive emotions are the inward-facing ones, and these cut more deeply. So things like fear, shame, self-judgment. These are things that if you think about them, embarrassment, that's one that always got me. That feeling of embarrassment, it's like cut to the core. I just felt so exposed when I would feel embarrassed. And those, I think, are harder for us to deal with because they cut right through to the core. So as we begin to look at these two different types of afflictive emotions, I think it behooves each of us to say, do I have a propensity for one of those types of afflictive emotions or the other? Do I tend to, if I'm in some sort of a difficult situation with others, do I tend to get angry or do I tend to get hurt? Because it tells us then what level of afflictive emotion are we going to be meeting. And so then if we see these, begin to see some patterns here, this is the first part of having a practice with it, is just to begin to be able to look at it. And again, depending upon the intensity of the content, it can be really hard to do that. So working with somebody in a counseling environment can help you to come to peace with the content to the extent that you can begin to look at the underbelly or the process, which is what we do in meditation. So for example, let's take one of the outward-facing emotions, because again, I think they're a little bit easier to work with for most of us. So let's take frustration. We all have frustration a lot of the time. It's a great one to begin to work with and see how do I work with, what works for me, I'll say, to work with frustration. And the first piece is just to be able to give it a name, to just begin to know this is what frustration feels like. This is one of the most powerful aspects of our meditation practice, friends, is this contemplation, reflection back on what it is that we're seeing so that we become more familiar with it. Whether it's concentrating, doing insight practice, doing choiceless awareness, reacting to one of our afflictive emotions, to be able to reflect a little bit and see, this is what that's like for me. This is what frustration is like for me. This is how it feels. This is how it manifests. And then depending upon where we are with that, we can meet it on different levels. One of the core teachings of the Buddhas is the Satipatthana Sutta, the foundations of mindfulness is what that translates as. And so the Buddha, in his the way he taught meditation, he taught the bhikkhus, the monks, to start out with being mindful of the body, paying attention to the body and the different aspects of the body. The next was feelings, feeling tone, and it's called in Buddhist psychology, which is whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. At that level, we're not really talking about the emotions. It's the tone of it. So that's the second type of mindfulness we would cultivate. Is this what am I feeling here? Is this pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? The third is what translates as mental objects or mental formations, and that is the realm of the mind and our emotions. So our thoughts, our perceptions, our memories, and our emotions all fit into that world of mental formations. And then the last one is consciousness. And it was very skillful the way the Buddha presented these, because they become more ephemeral as we move down the list. And you see this if you read the Satipatthana Sutta. The first half of it is just the body. He's got a lot to say about how to be mindful of the body. By the time you get down to the mindful of consciousness, it's a pretty thin set of teachings on that last part of the Satipatthana Sutta. And the reason is because it's so much easier to be mindful of the body than it is mindful of consciousness or the mental formations. The body does not fight back. When you pay attention to it, it doesn't fight back. It may be uncomfortable. You may feel stressed from what you're feeling in the body, but the body is not going to fight back with it. If you have an ache, you have an ache. That's it. If you have discomfort, pain in the body, you have discomfort or pain, but it's not doing battle with you. By the time you get down to the mental formations, that's not the case anymore, right? So if I feel frustrated and I want to pay attention to frustration, my mind could be chattering at me. I can't get this. I can't pay attention to this frustration. I don't know what's going on here, right? The mind is itself in its frustration is doing battle with itself in that very space. Much, much harder to be mindful of these mental formations when we're talking about afflictive emotions, these things that are gnawing at us like this, much harder to pay attention there than it is to the body. So a lot of teachers will say, to begin with, see if you can find a place in your body that connects with your discomfort. Is there something going on in your body that you can become aware of? And most of us, as we begin to pay attention, we see that there are certain places that we hold stress. So you may find in your shoulders, in your back, look for places. I know somebody whose their stomach is where they hold it. They get stomach pains. So you'll find, as you begin to look at the body, where do I hold my tension? Where do I hold my stress? Does it feel different if I'm frustrated? Does it feel different if I'm angry? Does it feel different if it's one of those inward pointing things like fear or embarrassment or shame or something like that? Do I feel differently in my body there? So it's worth the energy to pay attention to see where am I holding this in my body. And when we do that, we're doing two things at the same time. The first thing we're doing, the first thing we're doing is we're learning how the process of whatever this afflictive emotion is manifests in this body. We're getting to the very core of frustration. When we work with the content, we're not working with the core of it. We're working with a story about it. I'm frustrated about something. Well, I'll never solve it because I'm always going to be frustrated about something else. Right? So if I have to solve this one, next time I'm frustrated, I have to solve that one. Always solving the content, I'll never get anywhere because every time the frustration will be about something different. But if I begin to learn what is the very essence of frustration, what does that feel like in my body? Where does that manifest in me? And again, with this capacity to reflect on that, what is that like? What is it like to have frustration, to have these tensions in my body? As we begin to see that, I'll say we make good neighbors, not friends, but we make good neighbors with frustration. It's never going to be the guy you invite in the house, but it could be a neighbor that you don't have to chase away just because it's here. So a friend of mine, a teacher who's come to our Sangha many times, Amita Schmidt, talks about dropping below the neck for this kind of a practice. So as you begin to feel the afflictive emotions, you drop below the neck and find, where do I hold this in my body? What we're really doing when we work with emotions that way is we're setting aside all but the first foundation of mindfulness, just mindfulness of the body. As you begin to make friends with the afflictive emotion, we can then meet it in other ways. And you'll hear teachers talk about other ways to meet it. So you can begin to see, I did some work, I don't get angry often. I felt a little bit like you, Cindy, with your toe. I got angry. I was on retreat and I got angry about something. Oh, this is great. I immediately went to sit to try to work with the anger, because I just don't get angry often. But what I saw was exactly what the Buddha said about that honey crest. I mean, it was pleasant. I kind of liked the anger. It's hard to say that in a way, but it's not like I would induce it or something, but I saw that honey crest that the Buddha talked about. And whereas before, if you had asked me, oh no, it's like, I don't like anger, I don't want anger, I don't like anger at all. But in the moment, there was this this pull, this kind of empowerment that seemed to come with it. So as we begin to see how it is in the body, we can begin to move into the next level, which is this feeling tone. And to see clearly that something like anger might be pleasant. Something like fear might be unpleasant. And let ourselves come as close as we're comfortable to that feeling tone. Let ourselves engage with the feeling tone if we're able to. So what you'll see is we're dropping out of the content, whatever we were frustrated or angry about, into where we hold it in the body, then next into the feeling tone. Feeling that it's pleasant or unpleasant. It sounds on the surface like it's unpleasant, but is it really? And looking closely and being surprised sometimes to find, no, actually it's not. I like it. It's pleasant to me. And then if we're able to, the next step is to drop into the mental formation level, which is where we come to meet the thoughts of the mind and the emotions in the mind of the body. And this is tough terrain if the afflicting emotion is difficult or challenging. It's hard to go there because they whip up a storm. And as they whip up a storm, trying to pay attention in the mind or the emotions is challenging to do. So if you begin to see you're trying to pay attention and it's hard to pay attention, see if you could drop back into the body. But if you're able to pay attention to the mind, look at the nature of the thoughts. What we'll often see is that the emotion induces, it's like a tape or an MP3 on autoplay over and over again of the same series of thoughts that come in. And we don't notice it till we begin to look closely that these thoughts, I've had these thoughts before. These are not new. The feeling, the emotional feeling, as these things arise in us, what does that feel like? Can I feel the elements of it that are problematic to me? It's unpleasant. Maybe it is associated with, like for me, a lot of times they're, especially the internal types of ones, are weakening. My body feels weaker. Feels like some energy has drained out of me. To have something like fear or embarrassment or something like that come in. I'll say it's kind of like a modified metta or loving kindness practice we can do for ourselves while we're feeling this to help keep it in context and keep it bounded so that it doesn't run away with us too much. And so the phrases that we can use, and you got to make them your own, but like the first one is naming it. I see you, fear, or I feel my fear, I feel this fear. Fear is arising. I feel this sensation, I feel this emotion. So naming it, and naming it as part of this psychophysical organism, it's right here. The next is to recognize that you're still safe. It can't do anything to you. It's powerful to really know that. And the only way to really know that is to meet it face on. That when we have something that we want to turn away from, whether it's fear or emotion or anger or any of those things, if we are able to stay with it and look at it directly, we, just like other things, when we look at them directly, there doesn't seem to really be something solid there. Try looking at an afflictive emotion and it kind of evaporates. As soon as you stop looking, it might come right back, but in that moment it kind of evaporates. These sensations, and the same with thoughts, try to catch your mind thinking this set of thoughts that leads to more of the afflictive emotion. Try to catch your mind doing it. While you're looking, it's not doing it. It's just these things, mindfulness and these feeding systems don't happen together. So that can tell us something about the ephemeral nature of these thoughts and emotions. Again, if we're psychologically grounded, if it can tell us something about these things, that when we're present to them, they don't have any energy. And it also tells us that they're getting their energy from us when we're not present to them. So we start to have a series of thoughts that might come up around, let's say you're angry with somebody, and this person's done something before, and you remember that, and you tell yourself the story, they always do this. And the series of thoughts are feeding that process. When you're mindful, the thought chain breaks. When the thought chain breaks, we stop releasing stress hormones into the body, give the body time to clear. We can break the process. Again, to be able to do that, though, as I said at the beginning, your mind has to be stable from the content perspective, because if it's not, it can keep running away, and you can't really catch it. So working our way through the foundations of mindfulness like this, and then to the end, to being aware. When we work with these afflictive emotions, if you can get to this point with awareness, is just to hold whatever the emotion is or the thought is that you're experiencing. Just hold it in the awareness. Just let it be there. That's really powerful if you're able to do that, because you really see clearly it's got no real power. It's more like a baby than it is like a monster. A baby will thrash around and spit up on you and things. It's not trying to do any harm. It's just a little baby. These thoughts and emotions are kind of like that when you're holding them in awareness. And you begin to see, I'm actually the one who's in control of whether these things continue or not. And that's a very empowering thing to be able to see for ourselves as we hold this in awareness. So that idea of doing this like kind of a meta practice for ourselves, saying it's safe, and if it's intense, another part of that practice can be it won't last long. These things don't last long, especially if we're not feeding them. So to go through that series of little steps like that, what we're really doing is offering ourselves compassion. This path has two tools, and we talk about them in many different ways, but there's two tools. There's awareness and compassion. There's wisdom and there's love. And those two tools are pretty much it. That's what we have to work with. So the wisdom piece, the paying attention piece, is the curiosity, the investigation of what's going on. What's going on in my body. If I can be okay with that and sit with that, then what's my feeling tone with this? Can I feel the unpleasantness? Can I feel the desire in there? If I'm okay with that and can do that, can I now begin to go into the realm of how watch the thoughts arising and just let them arise? Can I watch the emotions as how they come to life and look at them with curiosity? Even as they're unpleasant, can I look at them that way? Can I hold them just in that awareness and let them be there? That's the wisdom piece, is going through that foundations of mindfulness. And the compassion piece is when we can't do that's okay. When something's too big, too intense, and we can't do it, that's okay. That's the compassion piece. It's okay if I can't do all these things. That's That's a pretty big leap from feeling an afflictive emotion to holding it in awareness. And it can take some practice. So if I don't get that the first time, if I can't even get out of my head long enough to find out where it is in my body, can I at least be compassionate to myself and kind to myself? This is the way it is right now. And this is where that metta practice will come in. This is what it is. I am angry. I am afraid. And it's okay that I'm angry. It's okay that I'm afraid. There's nothing wrong with anger or fear. They're very natural states. Doesn't mean I act on them. But the arising of these states are very natural. They're part of who we are. Can I see that I don't like being angry or that I don't like being afraid? That's natural too. And especially as meditators, right? We think if I do all this work, I shouldn't get angry anymore. I shouldn't be afraid anymore. But yet we are. So can I hold that also and see that, yeah, that's okay too. This is the holding ourselves in compassion. And then seeing that I'm safe. It feels dangerous, but I'm safe. It can't do anything to me. I'm sitting here in my chair, my cushion. It cannot change me. When I stop feeding it, it will go away. And even if I do continue to feed it, it will burn itself out. The last part of that metta practice. This is only here for a while. We burn ourselves out after a while if we let it go. So, and then the last piece, if it's really challenging, again from the meditation level, not from the psychological level, if something's really challenging, a particular day or something, go do something else. You're not trying to burn it away with some sort of laser mindfulness or something. Go watch a movie. Call a friend. Do something else if you need to just break it. That's okay. There's nothing that says we have to go through these things every time and be rigid about them. If you listen to your heart, not to the stories of your mind, listen to your heart. Our hearts know what to do. We can begin to incorporate these things into our practice. Beware of words when you're listening. Beware of words. From here, we're up in here. Words represent stories. Our experience is the next lower step than that. Our experience is the truth of what's going on for us. So if we're able to come back into that experience of what we're feeling and not listen to the stories of it, it can often tell us, okay, I can work with this, or I need to do compassion practice for myself, or I need to go out and watch a movie tonight. It can tell us what I need. So I wanted to just sort of touch on those things to maybe help give a little perspective for why different teachers might talk in different ways about dealing with these afflictive emotions. There is no one size fits all, not just for everybody, but for us at every day. One of these tools might work very well for you tomorrow, and then you try it the next day and it falls flat on its face. It just doesn't work. So I want to take a few minutes for questions. Again, I don't know what came up last time. Yeah, Cindy.
I was just going to say, one of the best things I've learned is what you're saying. I call it noting and naming.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when there's an uncomfortable feeling, instead of just ignoring it and going on about my day, I just go into it. Why am I feeling like this? It's generally an anxiety feeling, probably, but most of the time it'll dissipate.
Right.
Once I know, oh, that's what it is, and then you try and figure out why that anxiety has arisen. But also I realize that most of those emotions really, I can call it anxiety, but I think it's really fear-based.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was illuminating for me to realize that most of it is fear. It just shows up as anxiety or something else.
Yeah.
And so that's been very helpful.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Daily.
Thanks for sharing that, because I think you're right. I think if we look closely, most of the things, when you boil them down, they're fear.
Right.
And they masquerade as all these other types of emotion, but when you get down to the core of it, we're afraid. It's that little self which feels at risk. So thanks. Yes.
Thank you for the talk. It was wonderful. So I just want to ask, coming through the setup of Suda, my takeaway is that maybe we're not trying to figure out why we're feeling these emotions. Maybe we're just trying to be with them, and if or if not understanding comes, that's okay. Is that kind of what you're thinking, or is focusing on the content when you get down to the mental formations? Is there investigation going on? How much talking to yourself do you do? How much processing?
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Gail. It's glad you brought that up. So the processing of the content is psychological work. There is a time and place when that needs to happen, and that's the work of a good therapist or counselor, to be able to work through those things. That's not the domain of our meditation practice, because we're working with the content. We're working with the process here. So when we get to the mental formations part of this investigation, we're still not engaging the content. What we're doing instead is seeing what happens when that content arises in the process. So for example, let's just say you screwed something up and you were supposed to give somebody something earlier today and you didn't do it. And you're judging yourself. And you're able to sit with this and see where in your body where you're holding it, seeing it's uncomfortable. And then you allow the thought to arise, oh boy, I screwed up. Well, with that thought, I screwed up, comes very, very closely, it's not part of it, it's very close to it, is the feeling tone of this is unpleasant. The mind wants to push that away. So we go there. We don't, why did I not do this? Or what do I do next time? We're not working at that level. Here we're working with when the mind says I screwed up, what happens in my body? What happens to my feeling tones? What happens inside? And the reason we want to do that work is because if I can catch these what my mind says to me in these thoughts, and then the emotional response to it, if I can catch those, like what you were saying, Cindy, with the anxiety, as we catch those, we begin to notice, oh, this is self-judgment, this is embarrassment or shame or fear. That's what this is. It's arising. I can see it arising right now. And we kind of make friends with it. When we name something like that, when we recognize it, we take the danger out of it. It's when we don't know what it is that it feels dangerous to us. It's just, you could try this, like you were saying, just name the thing, and the danger seems to disappear. Your stories might still be there, but the danger part of it seems to go away. So even when we're talking about the mental formations part of this, we're still working with the process. We're just now we're getting really, really deep into the marrow of the thing, because we're letting the thing that normally takes over and runs away with us, the judging mind that normally runs away with us, we're kind of saying, I see your judging mind, give me your opinion. And I see you're just a voice. You have no power other than that voice, unless I choose to feed you. And in this case, I choose to not feed you. So we're still working at that level. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Sure.
I find afflictive emotions very paralyzing.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything like that comes, that kind of negativity, anger, frustration, all of what you mentioned, I shift immediately into deep breathing
Mm-hmm.
and into being aligned and attuned with source.
Mm-hmm.
And it just blocks it.
Yeah.
Could you swivel the camera around to who's talking?
Get some balance or some buoyance.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if you heard Joe. He said when it comes up for him, Joe, if I heard you correctly, when these afflictive emotions come up, they're paralyzing, and so he goes back to his source, He just stops the process from happening. And that's a powerful tool. We don't have to engage it.
It really works.
Yeah, so it stops it, and then that gives us time and space to decide what will we do next. We don't get powered over by it. The power over comes when we are enchanted by the story and let it run free.
I haven't done this my whole life. Early on, I was suffering with it, but I started into the meditation about 6 years ago, and it's in this period that those shifts came in, and
Yeah,
yeah.
and it can be different for different people. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for recognizing as soon as you can, and what's coming up, as soon as you see it. I mean, it's actually a gift to have this kind of the paralysis, because it's like a big red flag. Hey, something's happening. If it's not that big for you, it might take a little bit longer for you to recognize it. But as we get to the point where we don't energize it, either by stopping it or by seeing it, by loving it, by whatever method we use to de-energize the process, it stops bothering us. And even as these things begin to come up in other settings, they just come up and go away. They don't have to take over. And this is not otherworldly, friends. This is a basic training that we all have the capacity to do, to train ourselves so that our mind meets certain mind states certain ways. We do that every day. You have trained your mind already. Think of driving. My gosh, think of how many skills you have trained your mind to be able to just drive a car. This seems easy compared to that, doesn't it? Just to be able to meet when an emotion arises, when an afflictive emotion arises, before it energizes in more thoughts, to be able to recognize that this is what's here. Right? I mean, we're doing that with the mirrors on the car, with the car ahead of us, the car behind us. We're doing those kinds of skills. And just like you don't have to think about all those when you're driving. Can you imagine trying to drive and think about all those things? You don't, because they're second nature to you, because you have that mental muscle memory, I call it, of how to drive a car. So we're developing mental muscle memory of how to meet our mind, how to meet our emotions. It's almost like there's a door where you are of awareness, that your awareness is welcoming these things in as they come in. This one has no value, thank you. This one, this one's working, I'll use this one. No value, thank you very much. And this one, yeah. So it's not a problem for these things to come in once we've trained ourselves to meet it. And we're not thinking about it. It's not like an afflictive emotion comes in, you have to think about, well, how do I deal with this? It's more like driving a car. It's like, this is how we live. This is how we meet our afflictive emotions.
John, can you talk a little bit about when does this whole thing imply that we should engage some kind of counseling or therapy?
Yeah. So I'm not a therapist, but where I draw the line is when the content is so powerful that you can't seriously attend to the process. So the stories of the mind, what's happened in my past, what's happening right now, especially if they're repetitive. So I can see this pattern materializing over and over again, and the stories that come with it, I can see those over and over again. That will keep us from being able to get into the process. It's like a bungee cord, it'll pull us right back to it. So until we have found peace around those things, and that might require, again, I'm not a therapist, but working through some things, coming to face some things in our past. It could be different things, but it's a different skill set than looking at the underbelly of it. Now, the risk we have if we don't do that psychological work is called spiritual bypassing. And usually what happens, we end up either shutting down to something or stifling it to the point where it's going to come back. So the telltale sign of the spiritual bypassing is thinking we've solved it. When we think we've solved something. Because these are not things that get solved. These are things we change our relationship to. When we change our relationship to them, excuse me, they'll stop energizing. But if we think we've solved something, feel like we've solved something, look closely to see, is this something that needs that kind of work? Where I'm actually shutting down to life. If you feel apathetic, you know, apathy, in Buddhism there's a concept called the near enemy of something. So the near enemy is something that looks like a quality, but it's not. It's actually the opposite of it. So apathy and equanimity are that way. Equanimity is an open, lively, joyful way of being in the world. You might hear somebody in equanimity say, if there's a problem, it's okay, it doesn't matter, it's not a problem, I'm fine with it. Coming from a place of joy. Somebody with apathy who's shut down might say, it doesn't matter, I don't care. Same words. Completely diametrically opposed roots, though. So we have to look for ourselves to see, do I feel apathetic? And that's a closed-in feeling. The more there's a sense of me and a sense of I, the more it's likely to be apathy. The more there's an openness and the feeling of connection, the more it's likely to be equanimity. So those are telltale signs. Work with a teacher or a therapist. A therapist can tell you, do you need to do psychological work? A teacher can tell you, are you at that boundary or not? And there's some teachers who are actually both. Amita Schmidt, who I mentioned, is actually both. And I've co-led retreats with her and had the bounty of sitting in on conferences within the context of the retreat where she is doing both. She's actually doing both with people that we're meeting with, and it's just it's so wonderful to see how she can move between those two worlds very easily. Anything else? Well, hopefully this gives a little context to how to meet afflictive emotions. Again, there's no one size fits all, and if you listen to 10 teachers, you'll probably hear 10 different ways of doing it. So let listening to the teachers be the spice, not the rice. Use your mind, your open heart, your awareness to be the bulk of what you do, and let that be your guide. All right. Thank you.